welcome, guys. Welcome those of you who are with us for the first time. We're glad you're here. I want to just follow up a couple of announcements. One is the Better Man event. We want you to know about that. That's coming up here in April 13th. But we've got an event here in March, on March 30th. That is a big deal in this part of town. It's called the Oviedo Gathering. You've got an announcement on your table. We are going into our fourth year or third year, Rick? Third year. And this is a great event. It's becoming an all-city event. And I really encourage you guys to become a part of this. Rick Kingsland is our man who is needing how many guys, Rick Kingsland? We need 12 guys that can help us do some setup. Forge has from the very beginning been a part of helping to set up some tables and chairs, brain work, physical work that we all can be a part of. And I hope that you guys will plan to be with us on that day. So that is March 30th. All right, we are in a series. Guys, this is a highlight of my week, being with you guys, and it's good to have you with us, brother. Sam is only doing what we've asked guys to do, and that is badger other friends of ours until they finally show up at least one time. So that's he's just doing what we've called him to do, and long-term low pressure, right, in reaching guys. They don't like the hard sell, but long-term low pressure. So this is a highlight of my week. I enjoy it. As we gather at Forge, what we are about is building great men as God defines greatness, not as we define greatness. And so what we offer to people is biblical truth, following Jesus, and how that builds us into the men that we really want to be deep down, that we've been trying all our lives to be. And so that's why we gather. One of the questions, those of us who've been around for a while ought to be asking the question, do I have 25 years of experience or do I have 1 year 25 times? You see, a lot of times what happens is we can grow old and not grow up. And we cannot become wise guys. And that's our series. I love years ago when Kevin Kelsey and I first met, I said, what do you do? And he goes, I work for Boston Whaler. I said, what do you do? He said, I'm involved with continuous improvement. And that was several years ago. And the first time I ever heard that title, that's a job? Continuous improvement? I like that. And it's not always easy getting the people in your corporation to pursue continuous improvement. It's not easy for us guys to pursue continuous improvement in our Christian life. It's easy to level out. And so what we're about is growing into wise guys. And we are in this series, Wise Guys. Every year we do a module on biblical wisdom. How many of you have ever seen a Jack Reacher movie? Jack Reacher? A lot of you guys have seen Jack Reacher. A lot of you guys have read the novels. I love the second Jack Reacher movie. It starts out like this. Jack Reacher, who in the movies is who? Tom Cruise. In the books, Jack Reacher is 6'5", 250 pounds. So naturally, they would cast Tom Cruise in that role. But in the second movie, he's sitting at the counter in a restaurant, and he's all scraped up, bloodied. He's sitting there at the counter in a little restaurant, and the people that he just rescued are sitting in a booth nearby. And this big sheriff rolls up, comes in, and there's 4 guys, by the way, laying out in the street. They've been beat up. And they're just knocked out. And the sheriff comes and he says, I don't know what you think you're doing. Aggravated assault around here is a major crime. And so they cuff him and they lean him on the table there. And Reacher says, all right, in 90 seconds, 2 things are going to happen. That phone on the wall is going to ring, and officers are going to pull up, and you're going to be wearing these handcuffs that you just put on me. He says, that's quite a prophecy. And all of a sudden, the phone rings. And in the background, the cops roll up. And the next scene, and he says, who the heck are you? He says, he doesn't use that word heck. And he says, I'm the guy you didn't count on. I love it. I love it. Guys, as we grow in biblical wisdom, we become the kind of men that Satan doesn't count on. We become the kind of men that when we wake up in the morning, he goes, oh no, he's up. We become the kind of men that our wives, our family, and others look on and they say, whoa, I didn't count on that. And that's the kind of men we want to be, because the world needs more wise guys. And so in this module on wisdom today, we're going to look at Jesus, the truly wise man. We gave a definition for wisdom last week. Remember that definition? Wisdom is a kind of heightened knowledge. A kind of heightened knowledge that penetrates to the deep significance of the issues around us, but always leads to incredible relevance. Did you catch that? Let me say it again. John Frame said it. He's a theologian nearby. Wisdom is kind of a heightened knowledge that penetrates to deep significance and always ends up with practical relevance. That's wisdom. The relationship of knowledge and practically and biblically and perfectly applied in everyday life. This past weekend, I was up near Fort Rucker. You know where that is? Dothan, Alabama. You know where that is? L.A., Lower Alabama. You can't get there from here. At least you can't get back. I almost didn't, but it was great being up there near Fort Rucker and all these Army guys. It was great to be with them. But it was a big church, an enterprise, and young pastor, young staff, and so they fixed me up with their oldest staff member for lunch on Friday. The worship director is an old guy, even older than me. Can you believe it? I know, wow. So we sat down for lunch, and and he's a worship director, been a worship director since the time of the Apostle Paul. And I said, I'm just trying to figure out, what do I say? I'm not a worship guy. I can't carry a tune in a bucket, but he's a great guy. So I started asking him about his ministry, and wisdom just starts pouring out of this guy. He's been sick. He's the sixth worship. This is his sixth church, and this is what he does. He goes into churches where worship directors have blown up their church. He comes in and cleans up the mess. Man, you can almost get to heaven based on that without Jesus. Anyway, so I was talking to him, and I said, so what wisdom do you have, particularly about when you come into a new situation? I bet these young worship guys always come to you and ask you stuff. Oh, yeah, because when you move into a new situation, do you change things right away or not? He says this. I wrote it down. He said, when it comes to new change and going to new church, you take them from where they are to where they need to be as quick as you can, but as slow as you need to. Some of you are saying, huh? The church was in disarray. They got to change. You take them from where they are to where they need to be as quick as you can, but as slow as you need to. That's wisdom. I've been a pastor for a long time. That applies not just in the worship ministry. It applies in every area. When somebody's messed up their life, they got to bring them change as quick as you can, but as slow as you need to. Because otherwise you could tear a church apart by bringing change too quickly. Guys, that is wisdom. Do you catch it? Deep penetration into the subject with practical relevance. And we need more wise guys today with that kind of wisdom. Why? Because as Niall Ferguson said, we live in a day not of a democracy, but of a emocracy in America. We live in a time when emotions are more important to us in America than ever. More Americans are making decisions based on emotions than on logic and facts. And this is happening systemically in our culture. And so we need wise guys. And so we're going to learn from Jesus today. Here we go. Jesus, the truly wise guys. You ready? You got an outline there. You can follow my points. I'll have them up here. But first of all, I want you to know about Jesus and wisdom, that Jesus grew in wisdom. Luke 2:52, but it starts out really in verse 41. Many of you might remember this time when Jesus was 12 years of age. What did he do at 12 years of age? He went with his parents to what city? He went to Jerusalem. Where did he grow up? What city in northern Israel? Nazareth. And so they got to go all the way from Nazareth to Jerusalem. It's about 90 miles, but they were walking there. And so he had to go there. It was the Passover. His parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. Let me ask you this trivia question. Who had to go to the Passover feasts in Israel? Who was required to go? The whole family? Well, really, it was at least the men. The men had to go to the feast. When you were that far away, the whole families didn't go, but a lot of good families did go. They got in caravans, and they walked together, and the whole villages would go together down to Jerusalem. And Jesus was in this big caravan. They went down there, and they were there the number of days. And it says that the boy, after this took place, as they were caravanning back, as they were returning, after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan. And they went a day's journey, and they began looking for him, and they looked for him for 3 picking days. Now, they didn't find a body, so they figured he was still alive. They got back to Jerusalem, 3 days, looking around. Where was he? Talk to me. Where was he? He was in the temple. Who was he talking with? He was talking with the elders and the scribes and the wise guys who knew the law, Holy Torah. And he was interacting with them, asking them questions. It says he was listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his answers, 12 years of age. 12 years of age. And I love that. And so then his parents do what you and I would do. Where were you? Why did you do this to us? Mary, the consummate Jewish mother, said, why did you do this to me? And Jesus said, well, didn't you know I needed to be in my Father's house? 12 years of age. Does Jesus understand who he is? By 12 years of age, Jesus knows full well who he is. He understands his identity. He understands that he's the eternal Son of God come in human flesh at 12 years of age. And what's interesting to us as we read the gospel narratives, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is we find out that in the gospel narratives, there is precious little about the boyhood of Jesus. Why? Apparently, it's irrelevant to us. Apparently, God does not want us speculating about the boyhood of Jesus. And so in the early church, they wrote all kinds of stories about the boyhood of Jesus, how he's out playing with his friends, and a bird with a broken wing, and he heals it. They're stories. We have no idea. The early church tried to supplant that, but this is what really happened. It says this in verse 52. And Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Now, here's a question for us. Well, let's do a little theology. You ready? Because a lot of times Christian men say, I don't want any theology. I don't want any teaching. See, theology, doctrine is teaching, isn't it? Don't ever say that. Don't ever say, don't give me doctrine, because doctrine is simply Bible teaching, right? And if we do, and you're all theologians, aren't you? Aren't you? Yeah, theology is the study of God. And anytime you're thinking about God, you're doing theology. We create theologians here. Your churches are creating theologians. You want to be a theologian because you want to think biblically, right? Say yeah. Yeah, you do. So let's do a little theology. The question comes up is, if Jesus is the Son of God and he knew it, he's the eternal Son of God come in human flesh, why does he have to grow in wisdom? Last week we said that wisdom is an attribute of God. Well, if Jesus is the Son of God, why does he have to grow in wisdom? He has to grow in wisdom. The church said, here's what the church has done great theology since the very earliest of times. There is how many gods? One God in 3 persons. Holy, holy, holy. The Blessed Trinity. So we believe in one God in 3 persons. Well, then how could Jesus have to grow in wisdom? Because Jesus has how many natures, gentlemen? 2 natures. Divine nature and human nature. Fully God and fully man. In all the best creeds of the early church, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, all of those creeds, they had to do the theology to figure this out. And so Jesus had to grow in wisdom in his divine nature? No, of course not. In his human nature? Do you understand that fully? Neither do I. Is it a mystery? Yes. Is it illogical? Absolutely not. And so what we understand here is that Jesus in his human nature had to grow in wisdom. And it's so important that we understand that as Christians, as Jesus had to grow in his human nature in wisdom, that's a model for us, isn't it? By the way, Christians do a lot of thinking, don't we? We're not just interested in emotion, are we? We are interested in biblical teaching that leads us to think properly. That great theologian, Shirley MacLaine, famously said this. She said, don't evaluate and don't let your left brain judge what you're thinking. Give your left brain more space. As a matter of fact, don't think. What does that sound like to you? Besides foolishness. Guys, we think, and we think deeply, and we think biblically. Because we're called, and when we think biblically, we are thinking logically and rationally. Because we're growing in God's wisdom. So the application that I want you to get from this is to understand that as Jesus grew in wisdom in his human nature, we have to grow in wisdom in our human nature through every phase of life. Dads, you are the ordained priest in your family. You are the ordained senior pastor in your family. You are the one who is called to give wisdom and leadership in your family. And that's an important role, isn't it? Absolutely. And we learned this from Jesus, and we need to apply this into our life. Dads, you are the number one predictor that, and some of you you're not dads yet, so you're saying it's not relevant. It is, because one day you will be. You are the number one predictor that your children will follow Jesus. You are. Not your wife. You know what the number 2 and number 3 predictor is that kids will follow Christ? The grandfather. Why? Because men are the determiners of the sexual identity and the spiritual identity of their children. So should churches be developing men? Should we be developing men? Absolutely. That's why we do what we do here at Forge and support the local church in that way. So a team talk around the table. You're saying this is an awful long first point. It is. The others go fast. Don't panic. Team talk around the table is not talking so I can be heard, but it's learning to grow in wisdom, right? That's why we do it. All right. Secondly, I want you to note that Jesus excelled in wisdom. Matthew 1 through 6. And I love this. He goes in and he starts teaching on the Sabbath. I think we talked a little bit about this last week. He goes in and he's talking on the Sabbath day in a synagogue, and the people listen to what Jesus has to say. What do they say about him? They're kind of stunned because he's come back home. And it's like he's wise. And they say this. They say, where did this man get these things? And what is this wisdom, the word Sophia, given to him, and these miracles? And he says, isn't he just the son of Joseph, the carpenter? I love that. Jesus excelled in wisdom. His wisdom was stunning. Wasn't it, guys? Jesus, if you read the Gospels, Jesus never lost an argument. He out-thought, out-talked, out-debated everybody that he was around. He excelled in wisdom. Why? Because he's God come in human flesh. He had grown in his human nature in wisdom, and his divine nature obviously comes through. And so wisdom, guys, this is why wisdom is so important. It's outside the box. It works under the principle of low predictability. When somebody is truly wise, you go, whoa. Low predictability. I didn't expect that. So therefore, it leads to high communication. And when you and I exhibit wisdom and express wisdom, people go, never thought of it that way. Of course, because you weren't thinking. And so in Matthew 12:42, we see that the scribes and Pharisees wanted a sign, and it says this, the queen of the south shall rise up with this generation at the judgment and shall condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of, who is known as the wisest man in the Old Testament? Solomon. And something greater than Solomon is here. Jesus, I want us to grasp biblically, theologically, Genesis to Revelation, that Solomon has been officially surpassed by Jesus Christ. Did Solomon end well, by the way? No. He was a phenomenal mess up. So be careful when you say Solomon was the wisest man in the Old Testament. He had the wisest body of literature in the Old Testament. But he ended up a fool, an abject fool. Trust me on this, read the Old Testament. But Solomon has been officially surpassed. Who is the wisest man in the Bible? Jesus. Thank you, Kevin. Continuous improvement. You're listening. That's good. That's good. Guys, I want you to know something. There are tons of educated fools all around us. Did you hear me? There are tons. They're everywhere. They're like maggots on a dead dog on the side of the road. I want you to know they're everywhere. And you know where they come from? You're not going to like this. They come mostly from our educational institutions. Educated fools are everywhere, and they're influencing our culture. Now you say, that sounds harsh. I know. Jesus said some things similar to that. He looked at the Pharisees who were educated fools. He said, you guys are whitewashed tombs. You're all painted up nice and pretty on the outside, but inside you're full of dead men's bones. Wisdom. So I'm just kind of speaking the truth here a little bit, but the reality is, did Jesus' wisdom get him in trouble? If you apply biblical wisdom in everyday situations, expect that people will look at you and they will say, what? And they will think that you're a fool. In this series, Wise Guys, we're going to have a sub-series called Wise Sex. And I'm going to deal with everything we're dealing with. Gender, homosexuality, effeminacy, I'm going to deal with it all. And you guys are going to go, whoa. And you're going to say, I don't believe I would have said that. I'm old, I'm ready to die. But you know what? We got to speak the truth. Because we got a culture who wants to feel rather than think biblically. And we're going to get in trouble. But that's the day and age we live in. Christians always have been in trouble. So get ready. Jesus excelled in wisdom. Thirdly, Jesus modeled wisdom. 11:19. I want Matthew 11:17 through 19. I love this. He's talking about John. Jesus is talking about John the Baptist. He says something that I'm going to bring up in that series on wise sex when I talk about effeminacy, because he says John was not a soft man and he didn't wear soft clothing. People with soft clothing live in palaces. We're going to come back to that whole idea, but that whole section ends up with this. It says this. They say about John that John came neither eating or drinking, and they said, behold. Wait, let me read back up. I said that too fast. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, behold, a gluttonous man and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is vindicated by her what? Deeds. So they looked at John the Baptist, who was talking about Jesus, pointing to Jesus. They say, he's a bad guy. Then they look, because he doesn't eat, doesn't do anything. He's living an ascetic lifestyle. Then they look at Jesus. Jesus is eating, he's drinking, carries on a normal life with people around him. He's got friends who are tax collectors like Matthew, and they say, he's bad too. You think you're going to get people on your side if you follow Jesus? They're going to find a way to criticize you. Jesus modeled. This is important because we said that wisdom is not only heightened understanding that leads to practical relevance, right? Wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. I could look back on decisions that I made a long time ago. I had 100% certainty. I said, this is right. This is the right decision. And I was 100% wrong. It's tough when you're a pastor and you lead that way. But that happens. But wisdom is always vindicated by the outcome, right? True wisdom is seen in practical application, and practical application that works. It's real life. Wisdom is always vindicated by its deeds. And so if you and I will follow Jesus and the Word of God, even though we don't fully understand it all the time, and we tell our wives and our families, this is what we got to do because this is what the Bible teaches. If we follow wisdom in Scripture and apply it, even though it seems counterintuitive, it will bear fruit. It will bear out. And we will see. That's why I need table talk, which I'm going to give you in just a minute, to talk with wise brothers in the decisions that we have to make in life. Jesus grew in wisdom. He excelled in wisdom. Jesus modeled wisdom. Let me give you another one. Here you go. Jesus is unsurpassed in wisdom. Now, I'm just making the same point, right? So I can drive home this point, that there's nobody wiser than Jesus. A.R. Bernard, I love him. He said, when the devil tempts you, he shows you only the benefits, never the consequences. He shows you the short-term rewards, not the long-term costs. Satan wants you to make impulsive decisions right now before you take time to assess the potential outcomes. Would you agree with that? Yeah, I love that. And that's why we have to understand that Jesus is absolutely unsurpassed in wisdom. And that if we want to make wise decisions, I need to go to Him. I need to go to the Word. I need to go to godly counsel. I need to take my time. Lance Witt, in his book, High Impact Teams, that I'm reading right now, I'm reading it so slow because it has so much wisdom. He says, yes. He says, there is no innocent yes. There is no innocent yes. He says this is the principle of the distant elephant. Off in the distance, when somebody asks you to do something and you say yes to it, off in the distance is that elephant who looks far away. If you're not careful, that elephant is going to trample you to death because it's going to be up here pretty soon. So before you say yes, pastors, this is crucial. Yeah, I'll do that. I'm the king of yes. Yeah. And then you go, oh, gosh, I can't do that. I wish I hadn't said yes. You see, I want people to like me. So our identity has to be in Jesus. And so we understand that Jesus is unsurpassed in wisdom, and we go to Him for wisdom, even in key decisions that affect our family. Lastly, Jesus supernaturally imparts wisdom. I love this. James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, what? Let him ask of God, who gives to all men generously and without reproach. But let him ask in faith, without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Let not that man expect he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Here's a prayer. You pray it. It will be answered. God, give me wisdom. God cannot deny Himself. He always leads His boys in making wise decisions. You're His. He's got a vested interest in seeing you succeed. He's not angry at you because He took His anger out on Jesus, and He's got none left for you. So let's do a little wise guy talk around the table. You got some questions? First, you got to do a little theology. Make sure you got the theology right, and then move on, okay? I'll get you out of here on time.